In the stark silence of a courtroom, Valerie sat, her hands clenched tightly on her lap. Her gaze, cold and unwavering, fixed on the man sitting across from her, the man she once called her husband, Leon, the man who once promised to cherish her, who once vowed to love her for better or worse. But now, after 12 years of marriage, 2 children, and countless shared memories, all that remained between them was a polished oak table that separated their lives, their dreams, and their future. It was a chasm that felt too wide to bridge. For a fleeting moment, as the lawyers debated technicalities, Valerie caught herself staring at him, not with love or longing, but with an eerie sense of detachment. She was looking at him as if for the first time, a stranger, whose face she had once known so well, whose features had once been the source of comfort and affection. But now, those same features seemed twisted by arrogance, by a smugness that made her stomach churn. She could feel the weight of 12 years of compromises, sacrifices, and the quiet exhaustion of trying to hold their family together. But in the end, it was never enough for him. Valerie's heart twisted as she looked at Leon. His tailored suit, so crisp and immaculate, exuded an air of victory. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. He wasn't here for closure, for healing, or even for a fair resolution. No, Leon was here for one thing and one thing only: his pride. He was leaving, and he was going to take whatever he could from their life together. This was no longer about love or family. It was about winning, about proving that he could walk away unscathed, leaving her to pick up the broken pieces. Annabelle, the name cut through her mind like a blade. Young, radiant Annabelle, Leon's new obsession, the woman he had abandoned their family for. Valerie thought of Annabelle's effortless charm, the way she probably didn't understand the weight of the life she was stepping into. But Leon didn't care. He had moved on, leaving Valerie in the ruins of their marriage, leaving their children behind in the wake of his betrayal. Valerie's eyes flicked to the children's names written in the custody papers: Steve and Rose, his children, or were they any more? She looked back at Leon, the man who once cradled their children with tenderness, who had promised to guide them, protect them, had become indifferent. His hands, once filled with love, now rested carelessly on the table, as if Steve and Rose were nothing more than obligations, as if they no longer existed in his world. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. He was leaving her, leaving them. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. But the request was almost too much to bear. Leon didn't just want to take the memories. He wanted more: the gifts, the jewelry, the symbols of a life they once shared. Valerie's emerald necklace, a symbol of their fragile reconciliation after Steve was born. The diamond earrings from a rare, fleeting moment of happiness. The antique silver bracelet she had worn to charity galas as the perfect wife. He wanted them back, every last one of them, as if the tangible items were the only things that mattered. The audacity of it all, the sheer callousness. She could feel her chest tighten as the lawyer's words echoed in her mind. He was demanding these things, as if they had never meant anything to her, as if they were nothing but possessions, nothing but reminders of a life he had discarded without a second thought. Valerie thought of the countless nights she had spent, raising their children, holding their family together, doing everything she could to make their home a place of warmth, only to have it all reduced to items on a list. Dana, her lawyer, leaned in, her voice soft, her concern clear. "Valerie, are you okay?" She whispered, as though she could feel the suffocating weight of the moment. Valerie nodded, her throat tight. No, she wasn't okay. But she couldn't afford to unravel in front of him, not now. Not in front of the man who had torn their family apart. The judge's voice rang out, distant and cold, as if this was all just a formality, a transaction. The court grants the divorce, as stipulated. Custody of the children is awarded to Ms. Valerie Carter, with Mr. Leon Carter to provide child support as outlined. Visitation rights to be determined per the agreement. The words washed over Valerie, but she couldn't bring herself to process them. They felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't her. She stared at the grain of the oak table, tracing its swirls with her eyes, unwilling to meet Leon's gaze again. She couldn't look at him, not now, not ever again. "It's over," Dana said softly, her voice tinged with empathy. "You did what you had to, Did she really? Valerie's voice was barely a whisper as she fought back tears. The pain was overwhelming, but it was more than just the divorce. It was the realization that everything she had worked so hard for, the family, the love, the memories, had meant so little to him. He had moved on, and she was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. But even in the depths of that despair, something inside Valerie stirred. Something fierce, something that refused to let her fall apart. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something else, a new chapter. A chapter where she would no longer define herself by the man who had walked away, by the man who had broken her heart. No, this was her story now, and it was time to take control. If you can relate to Valerie's struggle, if you've ever faced the unimaginable pain of betrayal and loss, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Together, we can share stories of resilience, growth, and transformation. Hit that subscribe button now and stay tuned for more powerful stories that will inspire and empower you. Question for you: when facing betrayal, do you think it's better to hold on to the past and fight for what's lost, or let go and move forward? A hold on to the past and fight for what's lost, B, let go and move forward. Comment your answer below, or B, and let's start a conversation. Your thoughts matter, and we want to hear from you. The weight of the divorce pressed down on Valerie like an invisible hand, squeezing the breath from her chest as she navigated the complex labyrinth of emotions that came with the end of her marriage. There was a part of her that had been bracing for this moment for years, a quiet, gnawing awareness that her marriage to Leon had been on borrowed time. But knowing it was coming and actually living through it were two very different things. In the weeks that followed, Valerie felt herself drowning in a sea of conflicting emotions, none of which she could escape. The first wave that hit her was anger. It burned hot and relentless, a fury that seemed to radiate from her very core. How dare Leon leave her, leave their children, without so much as a second thought? How could he simply walk away from a family they had built together, from everything she had given to him? It felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for: years of love, sacrifice, and commitment. All the late nights she spent comforting Steve after his nightmares, all the dinners she prepared, all the mornings spent running errands and managing their home, they meant nothing to him. And now, he was leaving her with the wreckage of their family, taking only what he wanted and leaving behind the rest. It was as if she were nothing more than a disposable item in his life. But beneath the anger lay a deeper, more insidious emotion: doubt, self-doubt. Was she enough? Was there something wrong with her that Leon had chosen to leave? Did she somehow fail him, fail their family? The questions kept swirling in her mind, each one digging deeper into her heart. She had always believed that love could conquer all, that if you worked hard enough, stayed committed enough, you could weather any storm. But now, as the dust settled and the reality of her situation sank in, she was forced to confront the terrifying truth: love wasn't enough. Not when one person chose to walk away. There were moments when Valerie would sit alone in the quiet of their home, Steve and Rose playing or studying in the other room, and she would feel the hollow emptiness of their lives. She thought about the future, what it would look like without Leon, without the man she had once believed would be by her side through it all. She had invested so much of herself into this relationship, into this family, that the thought of rebuilding from scratch was paralyzing. What was left of her after all these years of being defined by her role as a wife and mother? Who was she beyond those labels? But as the days turned into weeks, Valerie began to notice something. It was subtle at first, just a whisper beneath the surface. A sense of strength, of resilience, that she hadn't recognized in herself before. For so long, she had lived in the shadow of her marriage, sacrificing pieces of herself to keep it together. But now, without the constant weight of Leon's presence, she could feel the stirrings of something new. It was a quiet, uncomfortable realization. She was still here, she had survived. She remembered the times when Leon's absence wasn't so pronounced, when they would argue over trivial things, over what to watch on TV or whose turn it was to do the laundry, and those moments now seemed so trivial. How had she allowed herself to be consumed by the need to make him happy, to keep the peace, to always do more for the family than she took for herself? She had sacrificed parts of her own identity in the process, but now she was forced to face a new, uncomfortable truth. Without Leon, she was still Valerie. And maybe, just maybe, she had been holding herself back for far too long. As the anger and self-doubt ebbed away, a new feeling began to take root: grief. The kind of grief that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. It wasn't just the loss of her marriage, it was the loss of the dream she had once held so tightly. A dream of growing old together, of raising their children in a home filled with laughter and love. That dream had crumbled before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to bring it back. She mourned not just for the man she had lost, but for the family she had envisioned, the future she had built in her mind. And yet, even as Valerie navigated the heavy grief that threatened to engulf her, there was a flicker of something else, something softer, but just as powerful. Acceptance. Acceptance that, despite the pain, despite the devastation, she was still standing. She was still a mother. She was still a woman capable of loving and being loved. She wasn't defined by her marriage, and she didn't have to be defined by its end. The children, Steve, her gentle, introspective son, and Rose, her fiery, passionate daughter, were the only constants in her life now. And for them, she had to keep going. She owed it to them, to herself, to find a way forward. The thought of moving on, of healing, was daunting. The emotional wounds were deep, and there were days when she didn't know how to keep going. But there were also moments of clarity, when she realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning how to live with it, how to move through it without letting it control her. There were days when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear, when she felt the pull to retreat into herself, to give in to the suffocating comfort of despair. But in those moments, Valerie would look at her children, at Steve's quiet strength and Rose's infectious joy, and she knew she couldn't afford to let them down. She couldn't afford to lose herself in the wreckage of her marriage. Instead, Valerie began to rediscover pieces of herself that had long been buried. She found solace in painting again, in creating something that was entirely hers. Art had always been a part of her, a passion she had put aside for the sake of her family. But now, with her life in disarray, it felt like a lifeline. Each brushstroke, each color on the canvas, was a small act of reclamation. It was her way of telling the world and herself that she was still here, that she was still whole, that she could rebuild, piece by piece, the life she had dreamed of all along. It wasn't going to be easy, and she knew there would be days when the weight of everything would feel unbearable. But for the first time in a long time, Valerie was starting to believe that she could do this. She could find her way out of the shadows and into the light. She could learn to love herself again, without needing validation from anyone else. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to forgive Leon, not for him, but for herself. Because forgiveness wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about releasing herself from the grip of his betrayal. Valerie had a long road ahead of her, but the first steps had been taken. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to rise above it. And as the days passed, the heaviness began to lift, ever so slowly. She was beginning to find peace in the midst of the chaos, beginning to see the possibility of a future beyond the heartbreak of her past. In the days that followed, Valerie's world had been reduced to a delicate balance of exhaustion and quiet strength. She was no longer consumed by the weight of her marriage. Its ending had freed her, but it had also left her feeling adrift, unsure of who she was now that the role of wife had been taken from her. The house felt too large, too quiet, and the empty spaces seemed to echo her sense of loss. But it wasn't just the loss of Leon, it was the loss of herself. The version of herself she had put aside for the sake of keeping her family together. She had given so much to the idea of being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, that somewhere along the way, Valerie had forgotten who she was as an individual. At first, the task of rebuilding felt overwhelming. The weight of the future, uncertain, unwritten, loomed large. There were moments when the world outside seemed to carry on as normal, while she was stuck, suspended in this moment of painful transition. But in the quiet of her days, when she had time to reflect, she began to realize something fundamental. She wasn't starting from scratch. She was starting from a new place, a place of growth and possibility, one that would allow her to define herself on her own terms. The fear of what lay ahead began to shift slowly, but steadily. Valerie found herself grasping at something deeper inside of her, part of herself that had been buried for far too long. It was in those moments of quiet contemplation that Valerie found herself rediscovering her love for art. She had always been an artist, but when her life had become so entangled with the demands of marriage and motherhood, she had set that part of herself aside. Art had always been her escape, her sanctuary, a space where she could lose herself and find herself again. But years of focusing on her family had erased that part of her, and the idea of picking up a paintbrush again felt like a distant memory. The courage to start, to reclaim that space for herself, didn't come easily. The fear of failing, of creating something that wasn't good enough, held her back. But in the solitude of her own home, Valerie began to feel the quiet pull of her old passion. It started with small, tentative steps, a few strokes of the brush, an hour here, an hour there. The first few pieces she created were simple landscapes, abstract pieces with no clear form, but they were hers. They were her own, not something anyone else had asked her to create, not something that needed approval. There was no need for perfection. It was enough that she was making something, anything, for herself. The process was slow, but it felt like a quiet revolution. With each painting she created, Valerie found herself reconnecting to the part of her that had always been strong, always been capable, but had been overshadowed by the roles she had played for so long. She wasn't just a mother, she wasn't just a divorcee. She was an artist, a woman with passions and dreams that were hers to cultivate. She was finally letting herself breathe again, and in the process, she began to discover who she was, who she had been all along. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when she thought the old fears would creep back in, but she pushed through them, one brushstroke at a time. Valerie also began to reconnect with people she had lost touch with over the years. She spent more time with her friends, especially Dana, her lawyer, who had become a steady presence in her life. Dana had always been there for her, but Valerie realized how much she had neglected those friendships during the marriage. There had been a time when she had felt guilty about spending time on herself, guilty for not being entirely devoted to her family, for wanting something for herself outside of the house. But as she started to rebuild her life, she saw the importance of these connections. These women, her friends, had always been there, waiting patiently for her to recognize the value of their companionship. They helped her see that she was not alone, that there was still so much to life, even after the end of her marriage. They reminded her of the woman she had been before she became entangled in the life Leon had created for them. In the quiet of her home, Valerie also found herself facing the responsibility of raising her children alone. Steve and Rose, though resilient, had been affected by the upheaval in their lives. Valerie had always been the one to hold the family together, to shield them from the cracks that had formed over the years, but now the weight of being both mother and father was on her shoulders. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she doubted whether she was doing enough. Steve, her introspective son, had retreated into his own world, closing himself off in ways that reminded Valerie of her own struggles. Rose, on the other hand, had become more outspoken, more defiant. Valerie didn't always know how to handle the shifts in their behavior, but she tried to listen, to be there for them in ways that allowed them to express their pain without judgment. It was through her children that Valerie began to see the true scope of her strength. She had always wanted to shield them from the pain of the divorce, but now she realized that shielding them was not what they needed. What they needed was her example, her resilience, her ability to adapt. Her love for them was unwavering, and it was in them that she found the courage to continue. As time passed, Valerie's path to self-discovery became clearer. She wasn't defined by the man who had left her. She wasn't defined by the roles that had bound her for so long. She was defined by her own strength, her own ability to rebuild, to recreate, to find joy in the simplest of things. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was hers. Her journey was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility for new growth. The person she was becoming wasn't someone new, but rather someone rediscovered. The woman who had always been there, waiting patiently to be seen. And in that rediscovery, Valerie found peace. She had no illusions about the road ahead. She knew it would be difficult, that the scars of the past would remain with her, but they no longer defined her. What defined her now was her willingness to heal, to embrace change, to move forward. It was the strength she had always carried within herself, now fully realized. And in that realization, Valerie discovered the most powerful truth of all, that she was enough. Valerie had grown accustomed to the silence that filled her home. It was a silence that had once been uncomfortable, suffocating even, but now it had become her refuge. The daily noise of her past life arguments, the constant hum of unmet expectations, the background noise of a failing marriage had all but faded into memory. For the first time in years, Valerie was truly alone with her thoughts, her fears, and her newfound freedom. The emotional weight of the past was still heavy on her heart, but each day, the burden grew lighter. She was finding herself again. But as soon as she thought she had begun to rebuild her life, fate threw her a curveball she hadn't seen coming. It came in the form of a phone call, unexpected and unsettling. When Valerie's phone rang, the screen lit up with a name she had not wanted to see again. Leon. For a moment, she just stared at it, unsure of what to do. She had moved on. She had worked so hard to let go of the past, to redefine herself as something more than just Leon's wife. She had built a life that was her own, not dependent on his approval, not waiting for his validation. And yet here it was, the one person she had tried so hard to forget, trying to reach her again. Valerie hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen. She could feel the old emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness beginning to rise within her, but she quickly pushed them down. This was her life now, she didn't need him. And yet, with a heavy sigh, she swiped to answer, her heart racing in a way she hadn't expected. Valerie, Leon's voice came through, softer than she remembered. There was no bravado in it, no smugness, no arrogance. Instead, there was something unfamiliar, a tremor of vulnerability, even regret. I need to talk to you. For a moment, Valerie said nothing. She didn't know what to make of this. The man who had walked out on her, who had abandoned their children, had the audacity to reach out now, after everything that had happened. He had chosen Annabelle over her, over their family, and now he was calling, asking for something. For forgiveness, closure. The thoughts raced through her mind, each one more complicated than the last. I don't know what you want, Leon, she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions that churned within her. You made your choice, you left us. You can't just come back and expect everything to be fine. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost apologetic. I know, and I'm not asking for that. I just I just need to say I'm sorry. Valerie's stomach clenched. She had heard those words from him before, at least. She had hoped she had. He had apologized for the infidelities, for the years of neglect, but it had never felt genuine. It had always been too late, too hollow. Could this time be different? Could he really mean it? Sorry doesn't change anything, Leon, Valerie replied, her voice hardening. You can't just apologize and expect everything to be fixed. You hurt me. You hurt the kids. And now you think a phone call is going to make up for it? I know, Leon whispered, and his words cut through her defenses. I was wrong. I know I can never undo the damage, but I want you to know that I regret everything I did. I should never have walked away from you. I should never have treated you like I did. Valerie stood in the kitchen, her hand resting on the edge of the counter, her mind whirling. It felt like she was back in that courtroom again, back in that moment where everything she had ever believed about their marriage shattered. His regret, his sudden change of heart was almost suffocating. She had spent so many years holding on to the hope that he would come to his senses, that he would see her, really see her, before it was too late. But now that the moment had come, it didn't feel the way she thought it would. It didn't bring the relief she had imagined. Instead, it felt like more weight, more pressure, more confusion. She closed her eyes, feeling the tears prick at the back of her eyelids. The pain was still there, raw and fresh, even though it had been buried for so long. The reality of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the broken promises, was still too real. And yet, here he was, asking for forgiveness, asking for something she wasn't sure she could give. You don't get it, do you? She said, her voice trembling. You don't get that it's not just about you anymore. It's about me, and it's about the kids. You chose her, Leon, you walked away, and now you want to come back. You want to fix things, it's too late. But even as the words left her mouth, Valerie felt the truth of them slip away. The anger she had held onto for so long was beginning to falter, beginning to crumble under the weight of his regret. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she was better off without him, but in that moment, she wasn't sure what she needed. She had built this new life, this new version of herself, without him, and now he was asking for something that was so much more than a simple apology. "I never stopped loving you," Leon's voice cracked, and Valerie's heart ached in spite of herself. "I know it's too late. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I just ... I needed you to know I've been living with this regret every day since I left. I've been a fool, and I can never make it right, but I want to try." For a long moment, Valerie was silent. Her heart was torn in two. Half of her wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he had no right to ask for anything from her, but the other half of her, the part that had once loved him so deeply, wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he was sincere. It was as if the last 12 years had been building up to this one moment, this one conversation that had the power to tear down everything she had worked for or build something new. But Valerie knew one thing for sure: she could not go back. No matter how much Leon regretted his actions, no matter how much he wished he could undo the damage, the past was gone. What mattered now was the present, and the future that she was beginning to build for herself and her children. She couldn't allow herself to be pulled back into that darkness, into the chaos of their broken marriage. "I don't need you to fix anything, Leon," she finally said, her voice steady but firm. "What I need is for you to leave me and the kids alone. We've moved on, I've moved on, and that's the way it needs to stay." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Valerie could feel the weight of his regret hanging in the air, but she didn't waver. She had made her decision. It was time to let go of the past once and for all. "You're right," Leon said quietly, the weight of his words settling between them. "I understand," and with that, the conversation ended. But for Valerie, it felt like the beginning of something new. She had passed the test. She had faced her deepest fears, her old wounds, and walked away from the past with strength, with grace, and with the resolve to move forward. In the end, Valerie knew that forgiveness wasn't about granting someone else peace, it was about finding peace for herself. And in that moment, she had finally found it. A sense of calm began to settle over Valerie in the months that followed. The frantic noise of her past arguments, the betrayals, the heartbreak had faded into a dull echo. There were still moments when she felt the sting of memories, when the ghosts of her old life tried to make an appearance, but those moments were fleeting. They no longer had the power to consume her. Valerie had found something precious amidst the wreckage. Peace. It was a peace that came from the quiet certainty that she was no longer bound by her past, no longer defined by her marriage or by the decisions Leon had made. She was free, not in the absence of pain, but in the understanding that she could face whatever came next with grace and strength. Her children, Steve and Rose, had become the focal point of her world. They had weathered the storm together. And now, there was a new rhythm to their days, a rhythm that Valerie was beginning to enjoy. The house was no longer a place of silence or tension, but a place of laughter, of moments shared between them. She had learned to find joy in the simple things, the small victories that marked their healing. Steve, who had once retreated into himself, began to open up more, sharing his thoughts and dreams with her. Rose, always the spirited one, seemed to be blossoming, her energy infectious as she danced through the halls, always looking for ways to make Valerie smile. Valerie had learned that, in order to truly embrace the future, she had to let go of the last remnants of her old life. It wasn't just about moving on from Leon, it was about shedding the skin of the woman she had been and becoming something entirely new. She had spent so many years sacrificing parts of herself for the sake of her family, of her marriage, but now she was beginning to see that she wasn't just a mother or an ex-wife. She was Valerie, and that was enough. The first sign that Valerie was stepping into a new chapter came when she picked up her paintbrush again. Art had always been a passion, something she had set aside in the rush of motherhood, in the demands of marriage. But now, with the space to breathe, she found herself gravitating back toward it. Her first few paintings were nothing extraordinary. They were simple, even raw, but there was something incredibly cathartic about the process. With each stroke of color, she felt a piece of her past unravel and fall away. She painted with abandon, pouring her emotions onto the canvas, letting the colors take shape without fear of judgment, without the pressure to please anyone but herself. She was no longer trying to create something that fit into a mold, she was simply creating. As the weeks passed, Valerie's work began to gain attention. A local gallery, noticing the raw emotion in her paintings, offered to display some of her pieces. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. It was as if, through her art, she was finally allowing herself to be seen for who she was, not as someone's wife, not as a mother, but as an individual, as an artist with her own story to tell. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. But even as Valerie embraced this new chapter of her life, there were moments of doubt. The world outside her home seemed to carry on with its own momentum, and sometimes she felt like an outsider looking in. She was no longer part of the life she had once known, and there were times when she found herself questioning whether she had made the right choices. Had she truly left the past behind? Was she strong enough to move forward without the security of the life she had built with Leon? There were nights when the quiet of her house seemed overwhelming, when the weight of the unknown felt too much to bear. On those nights, she would sit in the stillness, her thoughts racing, wondering if she would ever truly be able to let go of the things she had lost. She thought of the future, the life she was building, and felt both a sense of hope and fear. She was no longer sure of everything, but one thing was clear: she could not go back. The past was gone, and while it had shaped her, it no longer had the power to dictate her future. Through it all, Valerie learned to embrace her own strength. She had spent so long searching for external validation, first from Leon, then from the image of the perfect family she had created, that she had forgotten the most important thing. The only approval she needed was her own. She began to see herself differently, as a woman capable of starting over, capable of redefining her life, no matter the circumstances. She had once believed that her worth was tied to her marriage, that her value was found in the role of wife and mother. But now she understood that her worth was inherent, that it came from within. She was Valerie Carter, strong, resilient, capable of rebuilding and finding joy, even after everything she had been through. The children, too, were finding their way. Steve, who had struggled with his father's absence, was beginning to find his voice again. His relationship with Valerie, once strained by unspoken anger and confusion, was becoming something more open, more honest. Rose, ever the free spirit, was blossoming in ways Valerie hadn't expected. She was becoming a young woman, full of dreams and aspirations, and Valerie saw in her the same quiet strength that had always been inside her. The family they were creating together, just the three of them, felt like something new, something uniquely theirs. One afternoon, as Valerie walked through the gallery with her paintings on display, she stopped in front of one of her pieces, a swirl of colors that had once seemed chaotic, but now felt full of life, full of energy. It was the first painting she had created after Leon left. It was raw and unfinished in a way that mirrored her journey, but it was hers. She could feel the weight of every emotion, every decision, every loss, and every triumph that had led her to this moment. She didn't need anyone to tell her it was good, she knew it was. And for the first time in a long time, she realized that she had finally found her place in the world, not because of who she had been, but because of who she was becoming. Valerie looked at her reflection in the gallery window, and for the first time, she didn't see the woman who had been broken by a failed marriage. She saw a woman who had healed, who had found her strength, who was ready to face whatever the future held. She was no longer afraid of the unknown, she was ready to embrace it with confidence. This was her new chapter, and it was only just beginning. In the journey of life, we are often faced with crossroads where we must make difficult decisions that can alter the course of our future. Valerie's story is a testament to the power of resilience, self-discovery, and the ability to rebuild when everything seems to fall apart. Her path wasn't easy, but it was one filled with personal growth, deep introspection, and a slow but steady transformation. What stands out the most about her journey is her ability to reclaim her identity and her strength after experiencing such profound emotional pain. It's easy to believe that we are defined by our past, by the things we have lost, or by the people who have hurt us. But Valerie's story shows us that the true power lies not in what we have been through, but in what we choose to become in the aftermath. When Valerie first faced the collapse of her marriage, it felt as though she had lost everything. The emotional weight of betrayal, the fear of being alone, and the overwhelming sense of failure threatened to consume her. But through it all, she found a spark of something deeper inside her, quiet resilience that pushed her to move forward. She took the first steps toward rediscovery by reconnecting with her passion for art, something that had been buried under the responsibilities of family life for so long. She dared to express herself creatively, even when the fear of failure loomed large. That act of vulnerability, of creating something that was uniquely hers, marked the beginning of her healing process. Through her art, Valerie began to see herself differently. She no longer saw herself as just a wife or a mother, roles she had once defined herself by, but as an individual with her own dreams, passions, and capabilities. Her paintings, raw and imperfect, became symbols of her journey. Each stroke of the brush represented a step forward, a release of the past, and an embrace of the future. And as Valerie continued to rebuild, she realized that the key to her transformation wasn't about erasing the past, but about accepting it and choosing to move forward with grace and confidence. Valerie's story teaches us a powerful lesson about the importance of self-love and the necessity of letting go. We often find ourselves holding on to past hurts, grudges, and regret because we believe they define who we are. But in reality, they only keep us anchored to a version of ourselves that is rooted in pain. The true path to healing lies in releasing the past, forgiving ourselves for our perceived shortcomings, and embracing the idea that we can choose who we become at any moment in time. Our past doesn't have to dictate our future. We have the power to reinvent ourselves, to start anew, and to create a life that is meaningful and fulfilling, regardless of the challenges we face. The journey of personal transformation is not without its setbacks. Valerie had moments of doubt, moments when the weight of her decisions felt too heavy to bear, but through it all, she kept moving forward. She didn't allow fear to paralyze her or regret to hold her back. Instead, she found strength in the very things that once felt like her greatest losses: her children, her creativity, and her sense of self. As she embraced her newfound confidence, she found that the future was full of possibility, not because everything was perfect, but because she had finally learned to trust herself. So, how can we apply Valerie's lessons to our own lives? First, we must recognize that we are not our circumstances. We are not defined by the people who have hurt us, the mistakes we've made, or the setbacks we've experienced. We are defined by how we respond to those challenges. Just like Valerie, we can choose to face our struggles with courage, to use them as stepping stones rather than obstacles, and to embrace the process of transformation, even when it's uncomfortable. Second, we must give ourselves permission to let go. Letting go of the past isn't easy, but it's necessary for growth. Whether it's a failed relationship, a missed opportunity, or a painful memory, holding onto it only weighs us down. When we release what no longer serves us, we make room for new possibilities. We open ourselves up to healing, to learning, and to evolving into the person we are meant to be. Lastly, we must learn to love ourselves through the process. Self-love is not just about accepting ourselves when things are going well. It's about embracing all of who we are, including our flaws, our mistakes, and our vulnerabilities. It's about understanding that we are worthy of happiness, success, and peace, regardless of our past. As you reflect on these lessons, ask yourself, what parts of your past are you holding on to that are preventing you from moving forward? What would it look like if you let go and chose to embrace your own transformation? Take the first step today, even if it's small. Start by believing that you are worthy of a future full of possibility. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever had to let go of something painful in your life in order to move forward? What did that process look like for you? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a conversation. Your experiences and insights could be just what someone else needs to hear. If you found this video valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world and helps keep this content going. If you're able, please also consider donating to help support the channel. Even a small contribution goes a long way in allowing me to continue creating helpful, meaningful content. As someone who has lived through many seasons of life, I feel it's my duty to share what I've learned in the hope that it can make a positive impact on others. Whether it's a little or a lot, your support is deeply appreciated. Thank you for being here, and remember, the future is yours to create.